Welcome to Sport Fit Hub. Today we are super excited because we have a super legit guest with us, and one that has experience and some answers and advice, hopefully, for all of us recreational type athletes that are in this holding pattern now with our training and competitions. Just to give you a quick little background, Dan Proulx is the head coach of Canada's national mountain bike team, 2009 to present. He has coached at 3 Olympic Games, and athletes under his guidance have won countless national and international medals, including Olympic and World Championship medals. He has received the Coaches Canada Excellence Award 3 times. He is known for his creative leadership style and innovative coaching techniques. So that is quite a bio, and I'll just start initially by talking about how when you talk about leadership and impact, Dan is essentially the reason why I am, attempt to be a coach and a leader out in the recreational competitive world, I guess you'd say. In 1996, I had a friend that talked me into joining the University of Calgary Triathlon Club, as I was bringing my hockey career to an end there with University of Calgary. And to make a long story short, Dan was the head coach there. I think he had come from a swim coaching background. And, this triathlon club was actually pretty special between Dan and the people that were involved. It was a group that stayed together through camps and such for many years after that. And, when you talk about someone being able to have an impact, Dan and I probably did things together, training, I went to his camps, etc., for probably 1996 to maybe 99 or 2000. So in the whole lifespan, not very long, yet as a result, I've essentially followed in his recreational coaching footsteps, nowhere near what he's doing now, but Dan provided, I tell stories about those days nonstop. He, when you look at the awards he's won, the innovation, I get made fun of all the time, because when we're out on group bike rides, we will inevitably end up on some lost gravel road somewhere. And I remember many at camp where Dan was just, I guess you'd say, experimenting. We were ending up anywhere, and could be gravel roads, could be mud roads, but he was always looking to find the next something. And so with that, and then the passion, I think that was the biggest thing that Dan brought, was he loved it so much. And back then, it probably wasn't even so much talking fancy watt numbers and heart rate numbers and this training theory and that training theory. It wasn't maybe quite involved back then as it is now, but through actual leadership and coaching abilities, Dan had us following, and I learned a lot in terms of that aspect to coaching and trying to do what I do now, modeling that from those 3 or 4 years. So quite impactful. And if anyone enjoys what I do now, they can write in and thank Dan while we have him. So thanks, Dan, for joining us. I was going to make it short, but that got long already, but thank you.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Lots of good memories brought up there. And yeah, those were definitely the good old days. That was a lot of fun back then. And I think in those days in triathlon, there weren't a lot of things that you could look to learn about how to plan or do your training correctly. So a lot of it was experimentation, and a lot of it came from my background in swimming and just evolved from there. But yeah, Kevin, I have lots of good memories of you in the club, and for those of you who get to train with Kevin now, I'm sure he's still fast, but back then he was incredibly fast. He was coming from a lot of years of high level performance and training in hockey, and carried that fitness into the world of multi-sport. And I can remember Kevin thrashing everyone many times. So pretty fun to get back in touch with you, Kevin. And I think the great thing about that group is everybody's still all connected. It was a really good group that I think is well established in the fabric of sport in Alberta and across Canada. And great to see where people have gone with triathlon and cycling and all sorts of other pursuits that have come online since those early days.
Yeah, actually, and with regards to where people have gone now, I do an ATB corporate cycling thing May through August, sort of a client staff or client appreciation type thing. We take them out Tuesday nights, do some workouts, and then we have a couple goals through the course of the summer. So that's been a real fun experience and fortunate to get in there. And as it turns out, who is, and I apologize if I mess up her title, but who is high up there running some of the community work related to that is Carrie Lee.
Awesome. Yeah,
So yeah, so get to bump into her sometimes.
that's
So
great.
you went from swimming, triathlon. I think you went into some female professional road racing, and then maybe from there I lost track a little bit. And then the next thing I knew, you were mountain biking extraordinaire. Why don't you just fill in some gaps there in terms of how that career progressed?
Yeah, I guess oh, it's been a long journey, but yeah, started out with as a swimming athlete, and then the day that I stopped swimming, my coach, I had a phenomenal coach named Jeff Coulter, and the day that I stopped swimming, the very next day he offered me a position on the coaching staff, and I was there for quite a few years, and during that time, alongside, I was dabbling as an athlete in the sport of triathlon, and I started coaching, as Kevin said, at the University of Calgary Triathlon Club, and soon realized you couldn't really coach and race. So I wanted to do something that would allow me to still do some competitions. So I decided, well, I'll try this cycling thing, and I thought I'll do that, and then I'll have my other weekends that I can do triathlon. And I was into cycling for all of a year before I realized, wow, these people that I'm working with in triathlon, they need to do this bike racing. And so pretty soon my weekends were coaching cycling, and that slowly morphed over time. And during that time, I was starting up a junior triathlon club. And one day I'm at cycling practice at the National Cycling Center at the Olympic Oval, and the coach walks in, a guy named Richard Young, and he says, well, we're starting this junior program. Does anybody know anyone who could coach juniors? And I said, well, I've got this club. It's 40 young athletes. Maybe they could be the junior program. And that brought all of those kids into the realm of cycling. And from there, my career took off, and a lot of those kids that came from triathlon ended up as national team cyclists. In that group, 3 of those kids who were all of 15 years old, 16 years old at the time, 3 of them are now on our national team coaching staff for cycling. Yeah, everybody just kind of morphed into cyclists or cycling coaches over time. And I was fortunate to be at the Oval, so we got a lot of exposure to elite national team performers. But probably the best part was being exposed to the international level of speed skating, women's hockey. We had just so many phenomenal athletes in Calgary at that time. Well, and still do. But it was at the Oval at that time, it was definitely a medal factory. And that was just a great example. And it led me to go to the National Coaching Institute, pursue that. And then I ended up moving to Victoria. And funny enough, coaching's a weird thing. You have to kind of cobble together a few different jobs to make it work. And so I decided, well, I guess I'll work at the University of Victoria's Triathlon Club. And on the first day, I met this young woman named Catherine Pendrell. And she wanted to be a triathlete. She had moved to Victoria from New Brunswick, and was doing multi-sport type stuff. And anyways, she later asked if I would coach her, and she wanted to do a bit of cycling, a bit of mountain biking. And if you talk to her, she actually says I said no at first. I don't remember that, but anyways, over time, I ended up coaching her as a cyclist, and I also sort of over time started coaching a few more mountain bikers, and that eventually led me to weirdly being at the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and the initial plan was to sleep on the floor of Catherine Pendrell's parents' apartment that they'd rented, because I was going just as Catherine's coach. I had no accreditation with Cycling Canada or anything. I was just going as her personal coach. And about 2 months before the games, I got a call from Cycling Canada, and they said, "We heard you're going to the games anyways. We have an opening. Would you like to be the team manager for all disciplines in cycling at the games?" So I jumped at it, and I guess you make your own luck. And so took the gamble of taking on that responsibility, and it ended up that I, a year later became the head coach for the national mountain bike team, and I've been doing that ever since. And it's been a really fun journey, and I've gotten to develop 3 or 4 good Olympians, one on the road and 3 on the track or on the mountain bike. And yeah, it's been a fun journey.
Wow. How do I follow up now with a question? Um, yeah, it's interesting. We talked off air a bit, and um, there's athletes that win medals maybe, and sort of attain success that way, and are sometimes fast tracked to a high level coaching position. It's not always the case that because you can teach sort of thing. Um, and I know what I have a good friend that initially started the aerobic power with me. Many know him, John McGavick, who's a brilliant guy and great coach, and someone who I would always look to. Yet, I raced a little bit more. Maybe you could say I had some more results. I was more, people you could tell were more comfortable coming to me, even though I would go to him, sort of thing. So, in terms of your journey, I think it's extremely impressive in that, you've really worked your way up, really proving you can coach. And it's just now interesting to hear the steps that you took. And sometimes it probably feels, I guess, fluky, but you said it yourself, you create your own luck. And obviously, as you went from one place to the next, people see what other people are made of and what they can offer. And with the awards you've won with the creative leadership and innovative coaching, that's probably what people see, and have brought you these opportunities. When you talk about creative leadership and innovative coaching techniques, can you give examples as to how what you've done that kind of has brought that label to you with your athletes, besides taking us on gravel roads and such that we've never seen before on our beautiful road bikes?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting in cycling, because I've always said in cycling, if you do the same type of detail and work that you would do with any age group swimmer as a 12 to 15-year-old in any successful club in Canada, if you did that level of work with elite cyclists, you are a rocket scientist in our sport. Even though it's a really old sport, coaching it is relatively new, and the number of quality coaches worldwide is very small. So some of the innovation is actually just bringing world-class basics into the sport of cycling. And just in terms of leadership, I think that it's coaching has changed a lot. I think if you talk to the coaches of the 70s and 80s, they could rule with an iron fist, and that's just not how things work anymore. Whether you're in education or in coaching, the athletes are partners in the process, and we do things with a carrot rather than a stick, and a lot of it is trying to capitalize on the athlete's own motivation and what makes them tick, and bringing that forward. And I guess, like always, like Kevin, you alluded to it. I always coach even individual sports as though they were team sports, and we try to build a community and a team and a rapport amongst the athletes. And that doesn't change whether you're working with a community group or whether it's an Olympic team. It's that same thing is what drives people forward. It's being part of something special, and sharing in a common challenge or common experience. And I know you well enough, Kevin, to know you probably do that all the time with all of your stuff. So I think that's the advantage. Anybody can write a training program, but very few people can build a community and lead people to accomplish goals they didn't think were ever possible.
Yeah, I guess that's what separates the successful coaches from the not less successful. So that probably is a good lead into the next question, where I was just wondering, obviously this was going to be a big summer for some of your team with the Olympics in Tokyo. And how are they doing? I guess firstly mentally, it's
Yeah.
something that some have probably spent a lot of time and effort getting ready for, and there's some athletes that know it's probably a one-shot thing. Others are lucky enough to know it might come around again, but it's got to be very difficult. And you touched on community and team support, so that's probably helped. But how has the mindset been, and how have you kept them, motivated mentally,
Yeah.
and sort of not jumping off the bridge?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one good thing about the national mountain bike team is that they're an incredibly good bunch of people. We have great athletes and great staff, and they're all highly connected, on and off the bike. So that spirit is kept them motivated and strong. And even though we aim for an Olympics, I don't think we've ever made that the be all and end all. There's so much more that's going on, and at the end of the day, um, any experience in sport is one part those performances, but a much bigger part is creating good people and life after sport. And we've always made sure that we're trying to build athletes in a holistic way. So the fact that the Olympics are postponed, it's obviously there's some sadness there, but none of these athletes have the Olympics as the only thing they have going. They have so much other stuff on the ball, and there's other competitions, obviously, but at the same time, the other most important part of this is the year over year process and development, and that doesn't stop. And I think that any really truly elite athlete, they plan their training process with their coach first, and they add in the races that best support that process. And the removal of races, it's only taking away sort of one element in what we use to create that year over year progression. And frankly, for the younger athletes, they are like absolutely looking at this as an opportunity. This is a year to catch up and to be able to be competing for an Olympic team spot. So there are some really good elements to it.
And I think you really, hopefully everyone was listening, because, myself included, I'm not pointing fingers, but, when you look at the group that I work with, obviously Ironman's a big deal. And, other world championships for I2 are going to be here in Edmonton this year. There is a lot of disappointment and a lot of things really that people are going through and thinking about. And what you just said, I think if Olympic athletes and people who essentially are trying to make a living at this can look at it that way, I think it's something that we should really make sure that we take a step back and realize that Ironman, it's although a very huge accomplishment, it's not the end all and be all. And currently we're not in complete lockdown. We can still enjoy what you mentioned, the process. Everyone can still have great training plans. We can communicate and talk about them and have that community. So I think that was actually a sort of, we could call it the point for today's talk.
And it's kind of too bad at Ironman that they, when you cross the line, they say you're an Iron Man or an Iron Woman. Really, when you're on the start line, you already are,
Correct. Yeah.
because it's a multi-year or minimum 1 year commitment. And yeah, I think the removal of that final day, that's the day you're supposed to celebrate all the training you've done. If you remove that day, it doesn't change the journey that you've been on. And I think for most people, when they look back, they won't, you will have to go on the internet and look up what your finish time was, because you won't remember, but you will remember some of the crazy workouts that you did with your friends, and you'll remember that process. So it's the training that matters now, and that would have been the only thing you would have remembered from all this anyways.
Yeah, and I would agree 100%. Many even describe the day as almost anticlimactic when it's compared to, the months or a year of training and maybe fun getaway little training camps
Yeah,
of your weekend of pretending to be professional and enjoy those aspects. So
yeah,
yeah, I think that's a big part. And I think everybody realizes that. We just sometimes overlook that as we sort of let ourselves get overly consumed.
yeah. And
So
it's the
while
same with Olympic athletes. The exact same thing happens. And when they really perform well in the Olympic Games, it's usually because they've realized that it's the process that matters, and that they went and enjoyed the process of all that training. And then if they get to the Olympics, they enjoyed the process of doing that race. And then the result comes as a byproduct. It's
mm,
never the other way around, result first, and then it's enjoyable. That never happens.
right, yeah, oh yeah, excellent point. Um, Now, although we're just talking about the process here and enjoying it, and Ironman or the Olympics being canceled is not the end of the world. But people are still wondering, and for you too, I'm sure those big races and Olympics are just sort of the end result of a great process. But has that process been adapted or adjusted? Because in terms of training, there's still going to be different times of the year when you do different things.
Yeah.
So not having an endpoint and maybe possibly having a full year before an event even happens. um, a phrase used a lot is right now we're just going to go into maintenance training.
Yeah.
I don't know if that applies to your line of thinking, but what is now without divulging the national team secrets, what is the process now that you guys maybe have adjusted to with what's happened?
Yeah. Well, it varies a little bit depending on which athletes we're talking about. But in essence, the idea of maintenance isn't a bad one. We do it a little bit differently. I mean, we are always thinking year over year progression, and so in a lot of ways, the training systems that we normally use, we're still going to try and replicate some elements of it. But at the same time, there's an acknowledgement that this is an opportunity to do a lot of foundation work, a lot of aerobic miles, and I think for whether you're a triathlete or a cyclist, the one thing that you're probably lacking compared to athletes that come from places that have a little bit more temperate climate during the winter, the one thing we're probably missing is sort of a lifetime mileage or lifetime training capacity. And so for some athletes, we have some juniors and U23s that have only been training for 2 or 3 years, and some of those years they were in winter for 6 months of those. And so it's actually an opportunity to catch up on some miles that they might have missed. So for them, foundation is more important. For some of the more experienced athletes that have a boatload of mileage under their belts, they're going to be looking to keep some of the intensity elements that have made them stronger. They want to keep some of that in play, and the tricky bit is we just don't know when this might end or when we might get the call to start racing. And so in the back of our minds, we're just thinking, if the UCI gave us a warning of 4 to 6 weeks that we had a race, we need to be ready for that. So it's varies by individual, but I would say for the average bear out there, this is an opportunity to work on consistency, on some just making sure that you can handle each week of training. If you're missing workouts all the time, this is your chance to maybe do something where you're not missing those workouts, and
Right.
you're consistent over time. And obviously, if we don't have racing in the summer, there's an opportunity to be a lot stronger because you don't have the races sort of interfering with training.
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny way to look at it, but I don't think I actually think for your average bare endurance athlete, this situation is going to cause them to be stronger and faster when we come out of this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and we say the other thing that's important too is the caveat that if you're listening to this and you're in some area where riding outside isn't allowed or it's frowned upon, you really have to take that into account. And Steve Bauer was interviewed last week. He was asked if the pros in Europe who are under complete lockdown, if he felt that they could be ready to race a Tour de France or a Vuelta, and he said absolutely. The riders can train indoors. In fact, I think we're one of the luckier sports. We can almost completely do our sport indoors,
Hmm.
and so I think this is an advantage. And if you're doing Ironman, I mean, we all know that this is an event that years and years of training, of building training capacity are really helpful. So I think it's good for most people. If it ends up that there's no racing or there's delays or whatever, I think you can really use this to your advantage.
So just as a way to tie it all together, wrap it up, you can combine a sort of a mental component to a physical component. Um, a lot of us may use, we get through the winter because we're excited about an event in June. We bounce back from June knowing now we're excited about an event. You can call it Ironman in August. Um, I most of us would agree that the process, when you look, sometimes it takes reflection to realize how great the process was. So when you're going through it, those little mini carrots that kind of, I guess you'd say, motivate you. um, I guess to a certain degree it's just the job of the coach to educate and explain well, but how might you suggest that, we don't have those carrots now? What are those, I guess, things to look forward to, stepping stones, etc., to get us through? I mean, sometimes a lot of time on the trainer can get a little tiresome without
Yeah.
something at the end of the tunnel. So what kind of last few tips might you have here just to wrap it up?
This is a tough one because I'm turning on my triathlon brain actually, and thinking about we in back in the days when I would have raced and Kevin was crushing everybody, it would have been something like Great White North in June
Yeah.
or July, and then Ironman at the end of August. And let's just say that let's just imagine if there was no racing at all, what we would do. And I have to think back to the roots of triathlon, which was never about these big races. It was actually about being resilient and self-reliant. And I could see athletes getting creative and doing a solo triathlon with their one of their quarantine partners running a support car. I could see people doing that kind of thing because the that I planning those little adventures, I think, could be the carrot. At the same time, I've advised our riders that it's not really realistic to fully replicate some of these training races that we're going to miss. So I think you can copy elements of them, but I wouldn't be maybe trying to do a full half Ironman at race pace. I could see you doing some kind of, even just doing an Olympic race, solo Olympic race on your own with your partner, your best friend supporting that, and maybe doing chunks within that race at what you hope your race pace will be for a half or full. I think it's okay to modify. You don't have to worry too much about fully replicating. And at the end of the day, um, to me, it's going to be your overall training capacity and your endurance capacity and durability that is going to make the most difference for your average bear doing Ironman. And to me, you can do that whether there's a race or not. And in some ways, it's easier without the race because you don't have to taper. You can
Sure.
take proper recovery after. So yeah, it's be creative and work with your coach to figure out the best plan for you. And I guess that would be the other underlying thing is it's going to vary by athlete. And I can tell you that right now, when we plan training programs, every Monday morning is a sit down with the athletes, and it's it's just coaches saying essentially, how are you? How are you doing? And
Right.
some weeks the athletes are up, a bit down in the dumps, and you just have to roll with that. It's not business as usual, but we can adapt and we can be resilient. And Ironman is all about this. It's finding a way up, around, and through, and being positive even when you're being challenged or under stress.
Just keep
That,
one foot moving in front of the other, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Even if you're walking, as was usually the case for me.
There's been a few marathons like that for all of us, I'm sure. Well, Dan, this is probably yeah, we've probably eaten up a lot of your time already. I can't thank
No
you
worries.
enough.
Thank you.
To hear from someone now with your stature and just the fun part about for me being able to catch up again. So really appreciate your time, and looking forward to passing this on to people. I think some points here were extremely relevant and helpful to everyone out there in this unusual time trying to figure out just how to go about things mentally and physically related to their fitness, health, and for some specific event goals. So thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Dan.
See you later. Good luck to all
Thanks.
your athletes.